I'll admit, by the mid-2000s, my wrestling fandom was beginning to wane. As WWE got more complacent, I was starting to get tired of what they were offering. Now granted, Ring of Honor and TNA were there, but I was an idiot and hadn't sought them out yet. Regardless, I know that I was far from the only one who was still watching WWE, but at the same time, quietly questioning why. Of course, there were still a lot of wrestlers and angles that I liked, but those were almost always on the periphery, and they all had some sort of obvious ceiling. A lot of what was going on in the main event scene just wasn't doing it for me. Wrestlers I liked when I began watching had left, and the ones who stayed had changed so much that I was tuning out. The point is, fans like me wanted change. They wanted pep. They didn't even want an amazing wrestler, just somebody who, I don't know, kind of reminds them of the type of personalities they liked back at the Attitude Era.
Let me talk to you!
Oh, whoops, sorry. We're a little too early in the timeline for him. I was thinking someone more like...
Mr.
There he is.
Wrestling with regret. Let's get it, yeah!
The endless road of professional wrestling is paved with the careers of folks who should have become bigger stars. Talented people who were seemingly destined to become household names only to fizzle out due to some combination of bad luck, bad timing, doing the wrong things, or saying the wrong things. Over the last 20 years, few wrestlers have epitomized this as much as Mr. Kennedy did during his time in WWE. One of the fastest rising stars of the ruthless aggression era, Kennedy's meteoric momentum was difficult to maintain due to one mishap after another before being blipped out of the company entirely. And though he would go on to find success beyond WWE, it only came after a parade of blown opportunities at his last job. How did it happen? Let's find out as we explore the curious tale of... Oh, mother... Oh, how did he make it look so easy? Mr. Kennedy in WWE. Kennedy! By 1999, Ken Anderson had completed his wrestling training and made his in-ring debut in his home state of Wisconsin. To give you an idea of how talented he was from an early stage, he was already appearing as a job guy on Jacked by 2001 after having wrestled just 21 matches. Anderson worked the independents for about 6 years before getting signed to a WWE deal in February 2005. Reporting to Ohio Valley Wrestling, he would be under the watchful eye of Jim Cornette, who'd helped mold the early careers of future stars like John Cena, Batista, Brock Lesnar, and Randy Orton. Surely with his raw talent and ability, Anderson could one day be on the level of those fellow OVW alumni. But wrestling is full of those butterfly effect moments throughout the years. Things like, what if Vince McMahon lost the steroid trial? What if the Montreal Screwjob never happened? What if Chris Jericho never worked in New Japan? But in the case of our topic this week, his biggest question might have been, what if Jim Cornette was able to keep his temper in check? Shortly after Anderson began working in OVW, Cornette got in hot water with WWE after he slapped the future Santino Marella backstage at a show. Marella was a plant in the audience who was meant to be terrified of a debuting boogeyman, only to laugh in his face instead. Now in his defense, come on, how do you not laugh at this? I'm laughing right now! Cornette was understandably upset that Santino couldn't maintain the illusion, but WWE felt that he had crossed the line once he got physical, and he was gone from the company soon after. With the Louisville Slugger out as booker, in came the wise man himself, Paul Heyman. Heyman, who himself had been recently written off of WWE television, immediately took a liking to the cut of Anderson's jib, and together the two worked on crafting a character that would become TV ready. Anderson developed a bombastic gimmick that included him doing his own ring introductions, and in those early stages of his run, I think it's fair to say that that's pretty much all his character was. But hey, you can't go wrong studying one half of the Midnight Express.
I am Sweet Dan Pretty good.
Now all that was left for Ken was a name change. Because let's face it, if you're a wrestler with the last name Anderson, you had better bear a strong resemblance to either one of these guys. That robust hairline of his, right out. According to legend, Heyman advised Ken to change his name to something that would appeal to Vince McMahon's sentiments, like maybe after his pet dog Ruckus. What, was Ken DA off the table? Ultimately, Ken Anderson became Ken Kennedy. Not only was it a clever nod to Vince's middle name, it was apparently also a way for the man known on the indies as Kamikaze Ken to save money on tights. After a brief stint on Velocity, Ken Kennedy made his SmackDown debut in August of 2005 against Funaki, and he didn't wait long to make his voice heard.
Acceptable. From Tokyo, Japan, he doesn't speak a lick of English. That doesn't stop him from being SmackDown's #1 announcer. Explain that to me. I give to you, without any further ado, Mr. Kennedy.
I don't know how to explain this to people who weren't there for it, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that this kind of promo was damn near revolutionary in WWE in 2005.
I officially like this guy. I'm just going to let you know that.
Kennedy would beat SmackDown's #1 announcer, and from there it continued to build. This new jacked, bleach blonde heel who walked like an action figure and who talked about himself in a way nobody else was doing at the time. He was like Billy Gunn if he could talk.
There are two things in your life that you absolutely suck at. One is announcing. The other one is announcing. Astonishing 243 pounds. Yeah, gained a pound.
Man, he said he gained a pound. I love his versatility and the way to change his style up. Seriously, the message boards I was on at the time were having a field day with this stuff. Simply put, Kennedy's biggest strength was his ability to speak. His look wasn't the most iconic and his moveset wasn't spectacular, but there was hardly anyone else in WWE at the time who could touch him on the mic. Considering how important promo ability is above all else in the company, that alone could take him far. At the time, seeing him break out the way he did felt like a breath of fresh air on programming. He had this undeniable confidence about him, this aura, this Kavorka, if you will.
Yeah!
Okay, I'm sorry, I won't make that comparison again. By the time he made his pay-per-view debut at No Mercy in October, the graphics department finally caught up to calling him Mr. Kennedy, and he got his now trademark microphone from the rafters. Kennedy won that first pay-per-view match against Hardcore Holly, injuring Holly's ribs in the process. That sure is the guy I want to make mad. Kennedy quickly climbed the ranks on SmackDown, becoming a thorn in the sides of Batista and Eddie Guerrero, two pals who were seemingly hurtling toward a program with each other. On the November 11th episode, Kennedy and Guerrero fought for a spot on Batista's Survivor Series team, and in true Eddie fashion, he got Ken disqualified via his adorable cheating tactics. But sadly, this match became historic for all the wrong reasons, as it was Eddie's final match before his tragic passing just 2 days after SmackDown aired. It wasn't too long after the unfortunate honor of being Eddie Guerrero's last opponent before Kennedy hit his first serious career hurdle, as he suffered a lat muscle tear while on a European tour, putting him out of action for 6 months. To their credit, WWE did their best to keep him on the radar by occasionally putting him backstage, like for instance this interaction with Chris Benoit. Or the next week when he got to take part in some juniors division silliness.
Kennedy!
Is that Paul Burchill?
Kill me! Him popping in just to jiggle Super Porky's belly is only the fourth most insane thing about this segment that ends with Pirate Paul Burchill popping out from behind a curtain. It's better than nothing. In the same way that Just Joe's gimmick was better than nothing. Kennedy returned to action in June of 2006 to solid fanfare. He was still a heel, but fans had missed the act so much that they embraced it. In his return match against Scotty 2 Hotty, Ken even busted out a version of the Swanton Bomb to end the match. Hey man, good for you. Get that in while you can, because Jeff Hardy's coming back in a couple of months. The momentum Kennedy had from his return only lasted for about a month. After weeks of beating a who's who of enhancement talent, the man who claimed to be single-handedly changing Friday nights got beat by a directionless Matt Hardy, the first pinfall loss that Ken had suffered in WWE, and as one might expect, this never went anywhere for either of them. Around the same time, Batista had just come back from injury to feud with Mark Henry, the man who injured him. But in a cruel irony, Henry himself got hurt on Saturday night's main event, 1 week before their big grudge match on pay-per-view. A last-minute replacement was needed for the Great American Bash, and in swooped Mr. Kennedy to answer the challenge. Oh boy, the guy who lost to someone who'd been doing dick all since losing to Edge the previous year is sure going to be one to look out for. Since it was Big Dave's return to pay-per-view, it was obvious he was going to go over. Or was it? Within minutes of their match, Kennedy got busted open hard way after being rammed into the steel steps, and he bled some more on his way to a victory by way of disqualification. But it's okay, because Batista still got his move in after the bell. That way, everyone wins. But seriously, Jesus, can someone get a mop and clean all that up? I mean, the guy needed 20 stitches for Pete's sake. Ken's next big moment of sorts came at that year's SummerSlam, when he was one of the many goons on hand to help Vince and Shane McMahon try to beat Triple H and Shawn Michaels, then basically doing the same thing for another couple weeks on television to similar results. Not to spoil anything in this video, but damn, how ironic is it that this was actually the closest Ken was going to get to being a McMahon? Still, being associated with the chairman had its benefits, as seen just weeks later on SmackDown when Kennedy won his first and only championship in the company, beating Bobby Lashley and Finlay in a triple threat for the United States title. Ah yes, I can recall watching SmackDown at this time and calling this the "this belt doesn't look good on any of these guys" era. Confident that he had beaten all of SmackDown's best, Kennedy asked to be traded to Raw. Too bad he was talking to the one authority figure who had a thing for putting people in matches against a very specific guy.
The Undertaker!
Truly, this storyline was the biggest test of K-Double's career, and he definitely ran with it. In a terrific promo, Kennedy told The Undertaker that he wasn't afraid of what he called hocus-pocus garbage. Pfft, isn't that what they all say at first? It was one day shy of the anniversary of his pay-per-view debut when Ken took on Mean Mark for the first time at No Mercy. Though not for the title, of course, that would be silly. Kennedy managed to get the rare Duke over The Undertaker by DQ, Natch, but their beef was far from over. On the next episode of SmackDown, The Undertaker cost Kennedy the title against Chris Benoit, ending his reign at a mighty 41 days. Kennedy got revenge on Taker the next week by being mildly annoying during a match with Gregory Helms. Oh, you show him, Ken! Soon the K-Man found a common ally in MVP, and the two joined forces to take on The Undertaker and Kane and immediately lose to them. But the alliance would continue heading into Survivor Series when Kennedy was set to take on the Dead Man in a first blood match. As part of the build, it looked as if Taker's so-called hocus pocus began to take its toll on our hero.
The hell?
Dude, why don't you just move? Just walk in literally any direction and you'd be away from all the raining blood. It's not that hard. Am I an asshole for pointing that out? As the match goes on, the referee actually misses that Kennedy is the first to bleed, only for the evidence to be mopped up by MVP. Then Ken just stopped bleeding from his mouth, as one does. But Montel actually had it out for his short-lived partner and tried to cost Ken the match, only for it to backfire in Kennedy's favor. Once again, Kennedy won the match in crappy fashion, and once again, Taker got his revenge. This time by laying in a chair shot that looked so stiff, you'd think Ken was dressed up like Boy George or something. Fast forward to Armageddon in December, when the two wrapped up their feud with a last ride match, aka an ambulance match but a hearse. Rather predictably, The Undertaker won in the end and killed Kenny. And though Mr. didn't come out on top in the end, working a lengthy program with one of the biggest names in the company was nothing to sneeze at. After the accomplishments he collected in 2006, it wasn't too wild a prediction that things would pick up even more the following year. Sure enough, 2007 began hot for Kennedy, though with caveats. He had a world title match against Batista at the Royal Rumble, lost that. He got an ECW title match against Bobby Lashley at No Way Out, won by DQ. Man, I like the guy, but how does he keep getting world title matches despite losing so much? Who is he? Batista? In all seriousness, this pattern was not a great one for old Kenny to be falling into. Nobody likes a heel who's never able to back it up when it counts, because they have to be able to present some sort of threat. Eventually, the baddie does need to win big in the end. That finally happened at WrestleMania 23, when the man from Green Bay, Wisconsin achieved his greatest WWE triumph and won the Money in the Bank briefcase.
Kennedy wins Money in the Bank! Whoa!
Listen to that reaction. I know that Mania crowds aren't the same as any old Raw or SmackDown audience, but that's the kind of sound that's only reserved for a star. And in that moment, Mr. Kennedy appeared to be on the cusp of something great. But upon claiming the briefcase, he did what all the briefcase holders did back then. He lost. All the time. Nevertheless, the man had a plan. A few weeks after Mania, he announced the time and place where he'd cash in.
In just 335 days at WrestleMania 24.
According to Kennedy in interviews, the original plan was indeed for him to hold on to the briefcase for the entire year, which hadn't been done before and still hasn't been done since. A plan like that would require a lot of patience on WWE's part, but if they were able to hold for the entire year, that could be pretty interesting. So of course, that's not what ended up happening. WWE found itself in a bind when The Undertaker, SmackDown's world champ, went down with an injury. They had to get the belt off of him and fast. Time to go for the easy move. Send out Mr. Money in the Bank, have him go back on his announcement of waiting a whole year, cash in, get one over on The Undertaker, and finally fulfill his destiny. But that didn't exactly happen either. Just days after announcing his plan to cash in at next year's Mania, Kennedy thought to have suffered a triceps tear during a match, with an initial recovery time of up to 7 months. Not only did SmackDown not have a healthy champion, suddenly they didn't have a healthy Plan B either. So on the May 7th episode of Raw, Edge fought dirty to win the briefcase from Mr. Kennedy, then cashed in on The Undertaker that Friday on SmackDown to capture his first of 7 world titles. Man, that is one tough break. You hate to see something like that happen to an up-and-coming prospect like Kennedy was there, but that's a sad reality of wrestling. Injuries happen, plans have to change. Hopefully Kennedy can bounce back and regain all his momentum when he makes his big return in 1 month. So once Kennedy actually went to, see a specialist the day after dropping the briefcase, it was discovered that the injury wasn't a tear at all, but rather a deep bruise which had a fraction of the recovery time. If they had just waited a couple extra days to decide what to do with the briefcase, we'd have a very different story on our hands here. I cannot imagine how gut-wrenching it must have felt for Kennedy to have an opportunity like that taken away for what was ultimately an unjustified reason, an error made by someone else on his behalf. What could you even say to console him after that? Oops, sorry about this huge miscalculation which is going to totally change the direction of your career, pal. But hey, don't worry, when you come back, we'll have that glass ceiling nice and reinforced for you. With Edge transferred to SmackDown and Kennedy drafted to Raw following the injury, you could say goodbye to any chance of Ken trying to come back and avenge his loss to the rated R superstar. But his storyline woes were about to pale in comparison to what happened next. The night Ken got moved to Raw is remembered for something a lot bigger than the draft. Oh yeah, we're here again. The draft was held at the same time as Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night, which infamously ended with McMahon meeting his supposed demise in an exploding limousine. As I've discussed on this channel before, it was all meant to be part of a King Lear-esque plot by Vince to discern which family members were most loyal to him, with Kennedy emerging from the pile as one of Vince's most trusted allies and/or possible son. Since the storyline had dictated that the Mr. McMahon character had died, everyone on TV had to act as if Vince had really kicked the bucket. Even back then, a lot of people considered it to be in poor taste for them to focus on this kayfabe death in a business that is unfortunately chock full with real death. And sure enough, WWE was tested on how well they could dance around that fact not once, but twice. On June 15th, Sherry Martel tragically passed due to a drug overdose. Despite her induction into the Hall of Fame just 1 year earlier, WWE made nary a peep about the sensational one, because hey, we can only talk about one dead person at a time. I guess I shouldn't be all that shocked. Ignoring Martel's actual death in favor of continuing the charade of Mr. McMahon's was already awkward enough, but just over a week later, there occurred an incident so horrific that even Vince McMahon had to come back from the great beyond and acknowledge reality.
Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel are dead.
After what Chris Benoit did to his family and then himself, nearly everything that was planned for this big whodunit storyline had gone out the window, which honestly was the least of the company's worries at the time. They pivoted by revealing in storyline that Vince had an illegitimate child who had now infiltrated the roster. And while there were lots of potential candidates, there was one man above all else who seemed to be the bastard of choice.
What I do need right now is the undivided attention of my father.
Oh goody, I can't wait for Ken Kennedy to join the Vince McMahon Product of My Semen Club. On the September 3rd episode of Raw, Kennedy abandoned all pretense and innuendo and flat out stated that he belonged in the family.
I am your son.
But just when it seemed too good to be true, too obvious for it to be the correct answer, it proved to be exactly that, as the lawyer of the mystery man's mother explicitly eliminated Ken from the running. 1 week later, Vince declared that Kennedy was suspended for impersonating a McMahon, a charge so ludicrous it's almost brilliant. Once again, Mr. Kennedy was about to take part in a major angle. A ridiculous one, but a high-profile storyline nonetheless. And then he was gone. So what happened? Well, take a guess at who took a dump in his own punch bowl. In the wake of the Benoit tragedy, the national media zeroed in on performance-enhancing drugs as a potential culprit. Of all the active wrestlers who went to bat for WWE during this time, few were as outspoken about the validity of their wellness policy as Kennedy. He once admitted to prior steroid use in an interview with The Sun, but said that he had quit because, quote, "I knew that having a job with the WWE was way more important than the 10 pounds of extra muscle that the steroids gave me." This, of course, all blew up in Kennedy's face when Sports Illustrated published a report naming several top WWE stars who'd received shipments of PEDs and other drugs from the disgraced Signature Pharmacy. This led to multiple stars, including Edge, Booker T, and yes, Mr. Kennedy, getting suspended. Though Kennedy maintains that he had a prescription to help recover from his previous back injury, the suspension remained. And with that, any remaining hope Kennedy had of main eventing WrestleMania or being anywhere on top had seemed to evaporate. WWE instead went with the reveal of Vince's illegitimate son as Hornswoggle. Even more heartbreaking was the fact that it took place in Green Bay, Wisconsin. By the way, if you want to hear about how all that worked out, go watch my video I did about it. Kennedy came back from his suspension to face John Cena on the October 1st episode of Raw, only to immediately fall back into hot water.
What better way to make a statement here on Monday Night Raw than to take out the top dog?
Oh man, what a better way to jinx yourself.
Kennedy's got nothing to lose, everything to gain in this match. Cena can't afford to be injured.
In the opening moments of the match, Cena gives Kennedy a hip toss. The way Ken takes it isn't great, but apparently it's enough to cause Cena to tear his pectoral muscle, putting him out of action against Randy Orton for the title that Sunday night, ending the longest WWE title reign in decades, and keeping him on the shelf until his surprise return at the Royal Rumble. So, welcome back, Ken! Good luck! Following that unfortunate incident, Ken had a program with Jeff Hardy that went about 50-50. You know things aren't looking good when they're merging your one-on-one feud with a tag team program, as we saw at that year's No Mercy pay-per-view. Soon after that, Kennedy spent the winter feuding with Shawn Michaels. Here he got to pull out one of WWE's favorite tropes, sending out local workers dressed as other characters for the heel to mock.
One word that summarizes your feelings about this clown right here, Shawn Michaels. Egotistical. Chump.
Traitor.
Loser.
Hey, it was either this or Little People, and do you know how hard it is to get that many of them on such short notice? Ken had a lot to prove during this time, and I think this program did a good job to re-elevate his stock. If you couldn't have a good match with HBK, you were probably toast. The feud carried over into 2008 and ended with, you guessed it, Ken losing the big final match. Over the next several weeks, he worked John Cena again, which must have felt terrifying, and he lost to Ric Flair at No Way Out, providing easy fodder for the Nature Boys retirement tour. Then at WrestleMania 24, the show that in an alternate timeline would have seen him cash in his briefcase or have a career-defining bout with Triple H over the McMahon family empire, Mr. Kennedy fought in another Money in the Bank ladder match in a losing effort. We did get CM Punk as the winner that year, and that move turned out okay. Kennedy's creative direction may have been going nowhere, but hey, at least he got to star in one of those sterling direct-to-video WWE Films productions. Ken was off TV for a couple of months after Mania, down in Puerto Rico, the shining star of the Caribbean, to film Behind Enemy Lines Colombia. I'm aware of the irony, so don't bother pointing that out. He returned to Raw in early May and immediately found conflict from general manager William Regal, who was now even more drunk with power after winning the King of the Ring tournament. Well, why not have another go at Austin versus McMahon? You guys hadn't tried that in at least a few months by this point. Just when you thought that this might be the vehicle to get Kennedy over in a major way, fate intervened once again, but this time he had nothing to do with it. Only a couple of weeks after they first fought, WWE announced that the two would face off in a loser leaves Raw match, which felt a bit premature. Kennedy finally came out on top in a feud, beating Regal and sending him packing. But in reality, Willie Reeves failed the company wellness policy for a second time, resulting in a 60-day suspension and the need to cut the storyline ridiculously short. Kennedy's win was nice, but it happened before the angle had a chance to go anywhere. The draft took place about a month later, and Kennedy was once again given a fresh start by being sent back to SmackDown. But the man who loved to say his name twice couldn't make lightning strike twice on the blue brand. And then, somehow, it got worse! At a house show match against Shelton Benjamin and MVP in early August, Kennedy dislocated his shoulder and was out of action for another several months. When you look at the number of times this sort of thing had happened to or around the guy, you can't help but feel sorry for him. But not to worry, because despite all that, the WWE machine was still firmly behind Mr. Kennedy. Hey, who's got a movie to promote? Who's got a movie to promote? You do! You've got a movie to promote! Oh my God, why am I talking like that? Double K spent many weeks hanging out and doing backstage interviews to promote his new movie. Then when that ran its course, he was back off TV for most of the rest of 2008 and the first part of 2009. Another draft, another move back to Raw in April. Sounds like it's all going great! WWE still made an effort to hype his return, which happened to coincide with a memorable episode of Raw on May 25th. The show was meant to take place in Denver, but with the Nuggets still alive at the NBA playoffs, that meant the Pepsi Center was double booked, forcing WWE to relocate to the Staples Center in Los Angeles, home of the Nuggets' opponents in the series, the Lakers. And so, that week's main event was a spectacle worthy of its own entry into the Petty Hall of Fame, a 10-man basketball-themed match where the babyfaces wore Lakers jerseys and the heels wore Nuggets jerseys. Get it? 'Cause the Nuggets and Stan Kroenke are meanies. Nothing's better than a pissing match between two rich assholes. Kennedy teamed with Cena, Batista, Jerry Lawler, and MVP to beat Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, Ted DiBiase, The Big Show, and The Miz. The match was fairly unremarkable except for one moment, a seemingly innocuous spot that cost one man his job.
Don't want to get overconfident because something like that could happen.
Kennedy's back suplex to Randy Orton seemed elementary enough, but evidently Randy wasn't just selling that time as he landed a bit too high up. Considering Orton's history of neck and shoulder problems, he certainly had a right to be upset. The rumor goes that Orton and John Cena both went to Vince afterward and expressed that Ken was dangerous in the ring. Whether or not that's true, it was clear that after all the missed opportunities, all the injuries and suspensions, both to him and his opponents, this was the final straw. WWE had had enough and released Mr. Kennedy just days after his return to Raw. Just think, all those unsold copies of Behind Enemy Lines Columbia, and no one around to shill for them. The story of Ken Kennedy in WWE is a frustrating and disappointing one, to say the least. When Kennedy first arrived, he was a much-needed shot of adrenaline, his voice like a neon light standing out in a sea of mud. We'll never know how big Mr. Kennedy's star could have been in the WWE universe had everything turned out okay, if he didn't have such miserable luck time and time again. It's a shame that he never got a chance to grow so we could find out. But hey, in my opinion, the fact that he lasted as long as he did despite being a Paul Heyman guy makes everything he accomplished in the company practically a miracle unto itself. Ken Anderson didn't suffer from unemployment for very long, as he soon found a home at Impact Wrestling and carved out a nice little place for himself there. He finally fulfilled his destiny of becoming a world champion, twice in fact, and he was the man to finally bring down aces and eights. He's given back to wrestling through the school that he and Sean Devari opened in 2016, with Top Flight being their most famous graduates. And in more recent years, it appears that Kennedy has taken a lot of ownership in his downfall up north.
I wanted it to be somebody else's, a bunch of people conspired against me to get me fired. To be honest, I sort of phoned it in for the last couple of years. I made it there and I took my foot off the gas.
Wrestling is full of beautiful moments, but it's also equally filled with disappointment. And at least in WWE, Kennedy got that in spades. If you think your favorite wrestlers got it bad booking-wise, try being the guy who saw becoming world champion, main eventing WrestleMania, and becoming a kayfabe McMahon all slip through his fingers. It could always be worse. But what did you think of Mr. Kennedy's time in WWE? Let me know in the comment section. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.